I still remember the sound of his keys hitting the kitchen counter that morning. It wasn't just metal against marble. It was the sound of something inside me cracking. My name is Eleanor Drake, 68 years old, retired architect, and the woman who designed every inch of this house. The house my son just told me to leave. He stood there in his tailored jacket, his wife hovering behind him like a shadow. "If you don't like how we're doing things, Mom," he said, voice flat, "maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. The man in front of me had my late husband's jawline, but none of his warmth. Behind him, his mother-in-law was already unpacking grocery bags onto my counter as if she'd always lived here. The air smelled of arrogance and cinnamon candles. I didn't raise my voice. Architects learn that structures fall fastest when you strike too soon, so I smiled, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "Is that so?" I said quietly, running my hand over the marble I'd chosen 20 years ago. "Well, let's see how that works out for you." That was the morning my son evicted me from my own house. He had no idea he'd just drawn the blueprint for his own downfall. The first few days after that morning felt like walking through an unfamiliar version of my own life. Every hallway, every framed photograph looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. The warmth of family had been replaced by the quiet efficiency of strangers who happened to share my last name. Caleb, my only son, moved his things into the master suite within 48 hours. He said it was more practical, given that he and Nora, his wife, needed space to plan their future. I was reassigned to the small guest room facing the street. He spoke as if he were giving me an office relocation notice, not rearranging the home I'd built from the ground up. At breakfast, Nora would sit in my chair, sipping her almond milk latte, scrolling through her phone, pretending not to see me. Her mother, Marjorie, filled the silence with gentle condescension. "You should let the young ones handle things now." "Eleanor," she said one morning, while replacing my porcelain dishes with her simpler, more modern set, "it's time to rest." Rest. As if my mind were a worn-out motor. They brought in new furniture, new rules, and a new energy. Cold, perfumed, efficient. The thermostat was adjusted to their liking. My books were moved to boxes in the garage, and my garden schedule suddenly conflicted with Nora's yoga sessions. When I reminded them that I still paid for the property taxes, Caleb waved his hand. "We'll handle that now," he said. "You've done enough. Mom, just enjoy yourself." I didn't enjoy a single thing. I watched my independence shrink inch by inch, hidden under polite smiles and casual control. They began to intercept my mail, helpfully offering to manage my bills online. Nora took over my grocery orders, explaining that delivery apps were confusing for older people. One afternoon, I came home from the market to find my office door locked. My office, where I kept my architectural sketches, my late husband's blueprints, and the documents for the house deed. "Oh, that," Caleb said when I confronted him. "We're just reorganizing. It's safer if you don't worry about all that paperwork." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of the small guest room, the same spot where the moonlight used to comfort me. Instead, I felt caged, like a tenant in the life I'd built. The sound of muffled laughter drifted from the master suite. For the first time, I realized I wasn't simply being pushed aside. I was being erased. A few days later, while taking out the trash, I noticed a crumpled sheet in the bin, a printed email thread between Caleb and a law office. My name was in bold letters, followed by the words, "Conservatorship Evaluation." My hands trembled as I read lines about mental fitness assessment and power of attorney transition. Not they weren't just moving in. They were moving me out of my home, my finances, my autonomy. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The air outside was sharp with early winter chill, and for the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear. If they thought I was too old to notice, too frail to fight back, they'd forgotten one thing: I built structures meant to last. And when someone tries to dismantle one, I know exactly where to place the next beam. That night, I began to take notes, quietly, meticulously, every word, every change, every lie. They'd started a war in the house I designed. They just didn't know I was still the architect. The next morning, I put on my thickest sweater, made my usual cup of black coffee, and watched them from the kitchen doorway. They looked so comfortable in my home. Marjorie wore my apron, embroidered with my initials, as if it had always been hers. Nora was planning a small dinner party, meaning she was inviting her friends to the house I paid for. And Caleb? He was on a conference call in my late husband's study, feet on the desk, talking about transferring assets. I smiled as I watched. Smiling, I had learned, disarms people. They mistake silence for surrender. That day, I started documenting everything. I bought a small notebook at the pharmacy and titled it Blueprint B. Every page had dates, times, short notes, thermostat changed, no access code, mail redirected, locked office again, whispering about evaluation next week. When they left for the grocery store that afternoon, I unlocked the office with a spare key I'd hidden behind the radiator years ago. My instincts as an architect never left me. I always planned for contingencies. Inside, the air smelled of dust and betrayal. My files were gone. In their place sat a sleek folder labeled Financial Review. I flipped through it, pages of asset summaries, life insurance details, even my retirement account information. At the end, a typed note: "We'll need her medical report before proceeding." That night, I called my doctor, Dr. Myers, from my cell phone in the backyard. The wind cut through my robe, but I didn't care. I asked if anyone had requested my medical records. There was a long pause on the other end. "Actually," he said carefully, "your son came by last week. He asked about early signs of dementia and if I'd noticed anything unusual." My heart clenched. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the dark sky above my old oak tree. They were building a legal case against me, brick by brick, using my own trust in them as material. The next morning, I made an appointment for a full cognitive evaluation, on my own terms. I wanted every result, every certification. If they wanted a battle of competence, I'd arm myself with proof. Over the next few days, I began to act my age, or rather, the age they imagined me to be. I forgot my keys twice. I asked the same question twice at dinner. I even let Nora correct me about a date in front of Marjorie. They exchanged looks of pity, thinking I was slipping. I was giving them the rope they'd hang themselves with. Meanwhile, I started recording. My phone stayed on the table, the screen dark. Voice memo quietly running as they whispered about when the paperwork's ready and once she's declared unfit. Caleb's voice, my own son's, was the calmest. "We'll make it look like we're protecting her," he said. "It's for her own good." Each word hit me like a hammer, yet there was a strange relief in knowing the full extent of it. The unknown was always worse than the truth. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the living room window. Outside, the streetlights flickered against the snow. Inside, the laughter of 3 people echoed down the hall, the same 3 who'd once called me Mom, Honey, and Dear. I took a slow sip and whispered to myself, "You want to play guardians? Fine. But I designed the walls." From that moment on, every move they made became part of my blueprint. My quiet smiles, my questions, my polite nods, each one was a line in a plan they'd never see until it closed in around them. They thought they were building a trap, but it was me, measuring every inch. The snow began to fall heavier that week, thick flakes gathering on the window ledges like dust on forgotten plans. Inside, I kept my movements deliberate, unhurried, an old woman living quietly under her son's roof. That was the illusion I needed. When they left for the weekend, some business trip Nora insisted was urgent, I finally exhaled. The house was silent again, the way it used to be. I walked through every room, touching walls I once designed for laughter and light. Now they were witnesses to deceit. I opened the drawer of my old drafting desk, hidden under a tarp in the garage. Inside were my architectural sketches and, more importantly, a small envelope of bank documents I'd kept since Thomas, my husband, passed. Among them was the original deed, my name and only my name, bold, clear, notarized. That paper was my heartbeat. The next day, I met Lydia Cross, my former legal consultant and one of the few people I still trusted. She looked older, silver streaking her hair, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "They're planning a conservatorship," I said, sliding the photocopied email across her desk. She read in silence, her mouth tightening. "Classic manipulation," she murmured. "It's not easy, but it's not unbeatable. You'll need documentation, witnesses, and proof of capacity." "I have recordings," I said softly. Her brows rose. "Perfect. Then we play their game. Legally." We set to work. Lydia filed an official notice protecting my financial records and arranged a formal cognitive assessment with Dr. Allen, a specialist recognized by the state. I passed every test with ease: memory recall, problem solving, spatial design. At the end, Dr. Allen smiled and said, "Mrs. Drake, I wish I were as sharp as you at 68. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. Not peacefully, strategically. Over the next month, the pieces began to align. Lydia discreetly transferred the house title into a trust under my name, safe from sudden family management. At the same time, I reconnected with an old colleague, Victor Hahn, who now headed a design foundation for aging architects. When I told him my story, he simply said, "If you ever decide to donate that house, we'd be honored to turn it into something meaningful." The idea took root. Meanwhile, I continued my act, around Caleb and Nora. I played the forgetful mother, searching for my glasses that were already on my head, repeating myself in gentle confusion. They grew bolder, careless. I recorded every conversation. One evening, Marjorie was in the kitchen, whispering into her phone, "Yes, the papers will be ready soon. She's fading fast." I stood in the hallway, unseen, the recorder already running in my pocket. When they returned from the notary 2 weeks later, I was sitting by the fireplace, sketching. Caleb placed a stack of documents beside me. "Mom, these are just some updates for your insurance," he said smoothly. "Just sign at the bottom." I looked up, smiled sweetly, and said, "Of course, dear, but let's do it tomorrow. My lawyer likes to review everything." The color drained from his face. "Your lawyer?" "Yes," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Lydia Cross. You remember her." That night, I heard them arguing upstairs. Nora's voice was shrill, Caleb's low and sharp. Words like "too late" and "ruined" slipped through the floorboards. I sat by the fire, listening, feeling something I hadn't in months. Control? The next morning, Lydia called. "We're ready," she said. "The sale's approved, and the papers for the trust are filed. You just need to decide when to make it public." I looked around the house. The paintings, the light, the quiet echo of my husband's laughter that still lingered. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity, about making sure no one could ever weaponize my age again. "I'll make it public," I said, "at the gala." And just like that, the blueprint was complete. All that was left was to watch them walk right into it. The night of the gala felt like standing inside a memory I'd redesigned. The ballroom glowed gold, strings of light catching on crystal glasses and silk gowns. The annual Drake Foundation dinner had always been a celebration of the architecture firm my late husband and I built from nothing. 50 years of design, discipline, and quiet pride. Caleb and Nora stood beside me for the photos, pretending to be a perfect family. Caleb's arm rested on my shoulder, his smile tight. I could almost hear the calculation behind it. He thought tonight was the night he'd take over everything, the firm, the foundation, my legacy. He didn't know I'd already rewritten the story. Lydia stood near the stage, discreet but steady, a silent anchor in the sea of polite conversation. The orchestra softened, the lights dimmed, and the announcer called my name. I rose slowly, letting the room hush around me. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying farther than I expected. "Some of you have known me for decades. You've seen the buildings we raised, the homes we designed, the families who grew within them. Tonight, I have something personal to share, a transition of my own." The audience smiled, expecting a retirement speech. Caleb took a half step forward, his expression rehearsed. I clicked the remote in my hand. The projector behind me flickered to life. A moment of static. Then, voices. Caleb's voice first, calm and certain. "We'll make it look like we're protecting her. It's for her own good." Then Nora's. "Once she's declared unfit, the house is ours, right?" And finally, Marjorie, low and confident. "She won't even know what's happening." Gasps rippled through the ballroom like a gust of wind through glass. Faces turned. Whispers bloomed. Caleb's hand froze mid-air. Nora went pale. Marjorie's wineglass tilted, trembling, spilling dark red across white linen. I let the silence breathe before I spoke. "I was told old age is a weakness," I said softly, "but I've learned it's a weapon, too, if you know how to hold it steady." Then I turned to Lydia, who handed me a folder. "Effective this morning," I continued. "The ownership of the Drake family estate and the company have been transferred to a charitable trust under the Hahn Cross Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting older professionals starting anew. This includes the property currently occupied by my son and his family." A murmur surged through the crowd. Caleb took a step forward, his voice shaking but low enough for the microphone to catch. "Mom, what is this?" "Justice," I said simply, "and maybe a little mercy." Lydia placed an envelope on the table in front of them. "Per legal counsel," she announced. "Notice has been served." Caleb's eyes flicked between me and the crowd, friends, investors, former clients, all watching. His voice cracked. "You set me up?" I tilted my head. "You gave me the material. I just drew the lines." Security, hired quietly by Lydia, approached from the side doors. I didn't ask for them to be escorted out. They left on their own, faces bowed under the heavy silence of public shame. The orchestra began to play again, softly, tentatively, and people started to clap, not the applause of triumph, but of acknowledgement. When I stepped down from the stage, Victor Hahn met me near the exit. "You could have buried them," he said quietly. "Instead, you chose to build something." "I'm an architect," I answered. Destruction was never my specialty. Outside, the winter air cut through the noise, clean and sharp. I breathed it in, the city lights flickering like a promise. Behind me, the ballroom glowed, still humming with whispers of disbelief and admiration. Caleb had tried to take my house, my freedom, my name. Instead, I took back my story, and I built it into something he could never own. Winter melted into spring, and with it, the bitterness I once carried began to fade. The house, stripped of its old furniture and heavy memories, was alive again. Construction crews came and went. Laughter replaced the tension that used to fill every corner. I'd renamed the property the Haven Studio, a place where retired architects, designers, and builders could find new purpose, a space to create again, to mentor, to belong. The marble counters they once argued over now held sketches and blueprints. The living room that had witnessed my humiliation had become a light-filled workshop. Some days, I still caught myself tracing the lines of the walls, remembering how close I came to losing it all. But the ache that followed wasn't pain anymore. It was gratitude. I hadn't seen Caleb since the night of the gala. Rumors said he and Nora had separated. She'd taken her mother back to Arizona, leaving him with debts and silence. I didn't gloat. I'd already learned that revenge, even righteous revenge, only satisfies for a moment. What remains afterward is what you choose to build. It was a Saturday morning when the doorbell rang. The soft rhythm, 3 knocks, a pause, was unmistakable. I hesitated before opening the door. Caleb stood there, older somehow, as if guilt had aged him faster than time. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "You look well." "I am," I answered. "Would you like to come in?" He stepped into the hallway and looked around, his eyes sweeping across the bright new space. On the wall hung photographs of the Foundation's volunteers, men and women his age and older, smiling with the kind of peace money could never buy. "This is what you did with it?" he asked. "This," I said softly, "is what I built out of what you tried to take." He winced but didn't turn away. I deserve that. He took a long breath. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to see it, to see you. We sat in what used to be the living room. Sunlight filtered through the glass, washing the space in gold. For a while, neither of us spoke. There was nothing to defend, nothing to justify. "I thought I was helping," he said finally. "When Dad died, I felt like I had to be the one in control. Nora, she fed that. She made me believe you were slipping. And I let her." I nodded slowly. "You wanted to protect what you thought was yours. But Caleb, what I built was never meant to be inherited. It was meant to be understood." His eyes filled, but he didn't cry. I was so wrong. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. Then start being right. Do something better. Not for me. For yourself. He nodded, squeezing my hand once before standing. "You're stronger than I remembered." "I always was," I said with a faint smile. "You just forgot." When he left, I stood at the doorway, watching him walk down the path lined with new magnolias. He paused halfway to his car and turned back to wave. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was a beginning. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city, I opened the windows and let the spring air drift in. The house felt light, almost breathing. I thought of all the people who would step through these doors in the years to come, carrying their own broken pieces, and smiled. This home had seen betrayal and rebirth. So had I. And just like the walls I once designed, I had learned to stand tall again, rebuilt, stronger, and finally, free. A year later, the grand opening of the Haven Studio drew a modest crowd, former colleagues, students, and neighbors who had watched the transformation from afar. I stood on the small stage in the atrium, surrounded by sunlight and the scent of fresh paint, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, pride, without bitterness. Caleb was there, sitting quietly in the back row. He didn't try to speak before the ceremony. He simply nodded when our eyes met. That was enough. Forgiveness. I had learned. Doesn't always need words. It just needs time. When I cut the ribbon, the crowd applauded, and the sound echoed up through the glass ceiling like a promise. The building had been reborn, but so had I. After everyone left, I walked alone through the hallways. The late afternoon light spilled across the polished floors, catching on the framed blueprints and sketches of the people who would work here next. I paused by the front door, where I'd once been told to find another house. Now, this house belonged to something larger than pain or pride. It belonged to purpose. I whispered to the empty air. We did it. Thomas. Outside, the magnolias were blooming again. Their petals drifted across the steps like soft white feathers, signs of peace, of closure, of life rebuilding itself quietly, beautifully, just the way it should. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.